The night I ran, the whole town of Tamarack was singing the praises of the man I was running from. I could hear them through the floorboards of the larder, the good people of the valley, their voices warm with brandy and gratitude, lifting up the name of Dr. Ezra Sterling like it was a hymn. He had set the timber baron's broken leg without charge. He had sat up 3 nights with the schoolteacher's fevered children and taken nothing but a loaf of bread for it. He had given the church its new bell. To them, he was a saint in a black coat, the gentlest hands in the Cascades, and they had come through a building blizzard just to drink his whiskey and tell him so. They did not know about the cellar. They did not know about the cane he kept polished and leaning by the surgery door, or the way he smiled while he used it, or the careful, doctor's precision with which he left his marks where my collars and cuffs would cover them. They did not know that the quiet, grateful ward he had taken in after my father died owing him money was not grateful at all, but a prisoner who had learned to flinch at the sound of his boots on the stair. That was the cruelty of it. A loud man, a drunkard, a fist in an alley, those things the world will believe. But a beloved man, a healer, a giver of bells, that man can do anything he likes in the dark because the morning will never believe you. I had learned that the one time I tried. I had whispered the truth to the minister's wife, and by supper Dr. Sterling knew every word of it, and that night he taught me with his polished cane what my honesty cost. After that I understood. There was no door in Tamarack that would open for me. The marshal owed the doctor his house. The judge owed him his daughter's life. The whole valley was stitched to his goodness, and I was stitched in with it, a thread no one would ever pull. So I did not run toward the town. I ran toward the mountain which owed him nothing. I had been 3 weeks getting ready, the way a person gets ready who knows discovery means worse than death. I oiled the larder hinges with bacon grease so they would not cry out. I stole, one piece at a time, a heavy wool coat that had belonged to his late wife, a pair of his riding gloves, a man's oversized boots from the mudroom that I had to stuff with rag to keep on my feet. None of it was enough for the high country in December. All of it was everything I had. The last thing I took was not for warmth. It was a small book, soft-cornered and water-stained, that I kept wrapped in oilcloth against my ribs, my sister Annie's diary. She had come to Tamarack a year before me, a hired girl in a good house, and then one autumn she had simply stopped writing letters, and the doctor had told the town with sorrowful eyes that the poor child had taken sick and slipped away in the night, and was buried where the ground was soft. I had not believed the soft ground. I did not let myself think yet about why. I only knew the book was the last of her, and I would not leave it in his house. When the parlor laughter rose to cover the wind, I lifted the iron latch. The cold did not feel like cold. It felt like a hand closing over my whole body at once and squeezing the air out of me. The blizzard had teeth. The yard light was already a smear of gold in the white, and the trees at the edge of the property were only suggestions, dark shapes leaning in the dark. I pulled the door shut behind me, soft as I'd oiled it, and I stepped off the porch into a world that was trying to kill me, and for the first time in 2 years I was glad. I ran. I did not look back at the lit windows. I knew that the moment he went up to my room and found the bed empty he would not raise an alarm of fear. He would raise a careful, smiling alarm of concern. Poor Clara, she is not in her right mind, she wanders. We must find her before she hurts herself. And the good men of Tamarack would take up lanterns and guns to help the kind doctor recover his sick ward. And they would mean well, every one of them, and they would drag me back into that house and lock the door and never once know they had done it. That was the thing I could not let happen, not the cold, not the wolves, those I could face. What I could not face was being carried back wrapped in everyone's good intentions. So I climbed. For the first mile the fear kept me warm. I went up through the black pines with my heart slamming, my breath tearing out of me in white rags, my borrowed boots punching through the crust and sinking to the shin. The wind in the canyon above made a sound like the whole mountain groaning in its sleep. I fell and got up. I fell and got up. The cotton dress under the coat soaked through with sweat, and then the sweat began to freeze, and I felt it turn to a skin of ice against my back. And still I climbed, because behind me, faint and far below, I had begun to hear the dogs. Not wolves, hounds, the deep baying, patient music of a search. He had found the empty bed sooner than I'd hoped. The sound did to me what the cold could not. It broke something loose in my chest, a panic so pure it was almost peaceful. I thought, they will take me back, and this time he will not stop. And my legs answered before my mind could finish, throwing me up the slope, over a deadfall, down into a gully where the snow was waist-deep, and I had to swim through it, sobbing, the diary a hard lump against my ribs, reminding me with every breath what I was running from, and why no one would believe me when I named it. The land got crueler the higher I went. Rocks under the powder where I could not see them. A ravine that opened at my feet so suddenly I had to throw myself backward to keep from going down it. The pines crowded close and shut out what little light the storm allowed, and I went on by feel, by the upward pull of the ground, by the simple animal need to put the hounds behind me. Then I heard water. A creek, half frozen, running black between white banks down at the bottom of a rocky cut. I did not stop to think what the water would do to me. I knew only what it would do to my scent. I slid down the bank on my back, tearing my palms open on the ice, and I stepped into the creek. The shock of it stopped my heart. I am certain it did for one long second before it lurched and started again. The water came only to my calves, but it was the cold of the bottom of the world, and it went through the leather of my boots and froze my stockings to my skin and sent bolts of white pain up my legs with every step. I waded upstream as far as I could bear, which was not far, and longer than I could bear, which was farther, until the baying behind me grew confused, then thin, then drowned entirely under the roar of the wind. I dragged myself out the far bank into a thicket and lay still. I had lost them, and lying there in the dark with my clothes turning to armor of ice around me, I understood with a strange calm that I had only traded one death for another. The shivering had stopped. That frightened me more than anything because I knew what it meant. I had read it in one of the doctor's own books, the books I dusted, that when the shivering stops the body has given up its last fight. My fingers and toes were gone. A heavy warmth was crawling up my arms, a lie my own blood was telling me, and the wind that had shrieked at me all night now seemed to be singing something gentle, and the snow falling on my upturned face felt like the softest hand I had ever known, kinder than any hand had touched me in 2 years. I crawled, the last of my strength, under the low sweeping branches of a great cedar, into the dry dark hollow against its trunk where the snow had not reached, and I curled myself around my sister's book. I thought of his face when he would find the room empty. I thought of him standing in the snow at dawn, arranging his sorrowful expression for the town. He hadn't broken me. I had chosen this, chosen the clean cold dark over his polished cane, chosen to die free under a tree on a mountain that did not know his name. There was a victory in it that warmed me more than the false warmth in my arms. I closed my eyes and let the dark come up over me like water. I have only pieces of what came next. Silas gave me the rest of it later, sitting by the fire with his big hands open on his knees, telling it plain the way he told everything. But the pieces I kept for myself are these. A nose, a cold, wet nose against my cheek, and warm breath and a low whine that was not the wind. I remember thinking, far down at the bottom of the well I had fallen into, the wolves have found me after all, and being too tired to mind. I remember the branches above me thrashing as something large pushed in under the cedar. I remember a voice, deep enough to come up through the ground, cursing softly. And then I remember being lifted, and the smell of bare grease and wood smoke and wet fur, and a heat against my side like the side of a stove, and then nothing again for a long time. This is what he told me. He had been out in the worst of the storm, which no sane man would be, checking his high trap line because a blizzard like that drives the marten and the lynx to move careless, and he could not afford to lose a pelt to scavengers. He had the dog with him, the half-wild brindle thing called Boone that had walked out of the timber 2 winters before, and decided, on no evidence Silas could find, to stay. And it was Boone who would not come when called, Boone who stood stiff-legged at the edge of a rocky drop pointing his nose down at a cedar like he'd treat a cougar, until Silas went to see what the fool dog had found and saw the one thing in all that white that did not belong, a wrong-colored shape, a coat the dark blue of deep water, half buried under the branches. He knelt and brushed the snow away, and found a woman frozen into a ball with ice on her lashes and her lips gone the blue of the coat. He did not, he admitted, want to find me. He had come to the mountain 10 years before precisely, so he would never again have to lift another ruined body out of the consequences of other men's cruelty. He pressed 2 fingers to my throat, and felt nothing for so long that he had near given me up. And then he felt it, one beat, slow and crooked, and then another. "Damn it all," he said. And then he said nothing else, because the code of the mountain has only one law and it admits of no argument. You do not leave a living soul to freeze. He gathered me up. I weighed nothing, he said, less than a half-grown elk, and he shielded my face in the lapel of his bear-hide coat, and he carried me up an hour's hard climb through the teeth of the storm to the cabin he had built with his own 2 hands against the granite face of the ridge, where the wind could not reach. He told me how he stoked the dead fire back to a roar with dry cedar, how he could not give my frozen feet to the heat directly, for the heat would have killed the flesh, so he rubbed them with handfuls of snow to thaw them slow, cursing at the white waxy color of my toes. How he stripped the ice-stiff clothes off me with his face turned, and his big hands gentle as he could make them, and dressed me in a flannel union suit of his own, and wrapped me in 3 thick hides, and set my feet near but not too near the fire, and heated a pot of venison broth, and pulled up a chair and waited. And how Boone, who trusted no living person but Silas Bowen and had bitten 2 of those, lay down the whole night with his chin across my ankles and would not be moved. That was the first time the dog told the truth about me. I did not learn until later how much that mattered. I came back to the world the way you come up out of deep water, all at once, gasping, with a terror that had no shape yet. My eyes opened on a log ceiling lit orange and dancing, and a pain so enormous flooded my hands and feet that I cried out, the blood forcing itself back into thawing flesh like fire poured into the veins. "Izzy." The voice came from the shadows by the hearth, and it was the deepest voice I had ever heard, and it stopped my breath. I turned my head and saw him. I have no other word for what I saw but mountain. He was sitting in a chair that looked small under him, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees, and even sitting he seemed to fill half the room. His shoulders were the width of the door. His face was weathered dark and half buried in a thick black beard frosted gray at the edges, and a long pale scar ran from his brow down into the beard, pulling the skin tight around one eye so that it caught the firelight and glinted like flint. He did not look like a man. He looked like something the mountain had made out of stone and weather and put there to frighten people off. And every memory of the night came back at once, the larder, the cold, the hounds, the doctor's sorrowful smiling face, and one thought rose up over all of it and drowned everything else. He tracked me down. A man does not come up a mountain in a blizzard for nothing. A man does not strip a strange woman and carry her to his den for kindness. I knew, the way I had been taught to know, that kind hands were the most dangerous kind. I scrambled backward into the furs, tangling, and my hand closed on something cold and heavy leaning against the hearthstone, a long iron rod, a fire iron, and I dragged it up and held it out, though my arms shook so badly I could barely keep its point off the floor. "Stay back," I said, and my voice came out a ruined whisper. "If Sterling sent you, if you mean to carry me back, I'll kill you first. I swear before God I'll kill you first." The mountain did not move. He did not stand. He did not even take his arms off his knees. He only looked at me out of that single bright eye, steady and unbothered, and from the foot of the bed there came a low growl, and I saw the dog then, a rough brindle thing risen up stiff between me and the door, hackles raised, looking not at me but at the iron in my hand, ready to defend the man if I came at him. "Put the iron down," the mountain said. His voice was infuriatingly calm, slow as snowmelt. "If I'd wanted you dead, woman, I'd have left you under that cedar. It'd have cost me a deal less effort." He nodded at a tin cup steaming on a stump beside the bed. "Drink the broth before it skins over. Your feet are going to hurt like the devil for a week, and that's the good news. Means you get to keep them." I did not drink it. I kept the iron up. I looked at the scar and the beard and the bear hide and the rough log walls and the snow piling against the shutters, and slowly, against my will, a part of me that had grown very good at reading men for danger began to send up a different report. He had not moved toward me. He had not raised his voice. He had not locked any door. The door, I saw, hung crooked on a thrown bolt, openable from the inside. And the dog had not gone for my throat. The dog had risen to guard the man, yes, but when I did not lunge, the dog settled again, slow, and laid his chin back on the furs near my feet, and looked up at me with something that was not hatred. Animals do not pretend. The doctor's spaniels had cowered from him and fawned in equal measure, frightened things, but I had never once seen a creature simply be at ease near a cruel man. This dog was at ease. "Who are you?" I said. It came out less a demand than I meant. "Name Silas Bowen. This is my mountain you took a notion to die on." He tipped his head a half-inch toward the dog. "That one's Boone. He found you. You can thank him by not braining me with my own fire iron on account of he's fond of me, the Lord knows why." Something cracked in my chest then, not trust, not yet, but the first hairline fracture in 2 years of armor. I lowered the iron until its tip rested on the floor. I kept it in my hand. I reached for the cup with the other, and my fingers were so stiff and clumsy I near spilled it. And the broth was rich and hot and salted. And when it hit my empty stomach, it spread through me like the first kind thing the world had done for me in longer than I could remember. And to my shame, I began to cry. He let me. He did not say there. He did not come closer. He just sat and tended the fire and let me weep into a tin cup, and the dog put his nose against my hand, and after a while the worst of it passed. It was when I had gone quiet again that he spoke, and his voice had changed. It had dropped lower, and there was an edge under it now, a stillness like the stillness before a tree comes down. "You said a name." He did not look at me, he looked at the flames. "When you took up that iron, you said if Sterling sent me." I went cold in a way the broth could not reach. "Dr. Ezra Sterling," I whispered, "of Tamarack." He sat very still. The fire popped. Boone lifted his head and looked at his master and gave a low, uncertain sound, the way a dog does when it feels a change in the air it cannot name. "The good doctor," Silas said at last, and he said good the way another man might spit. He reached over and picked up a length of cedar and laid it on the fire, careful, deliberate, like a man giving his hands something to do so they would not do worse. "Tell me, then. Tell me how a slip of a girl in a cotton dress comes to fling herself off a mountain in a blizzard to get clear of the gentlest man in the valley. And don't trim it. I've had a bellyful in my life of trimmed stories about kind men." So I told him. I had not told the whole of it to a living soul, not the minister's wife, not anyone, because I had learned what telling cost. But there was something in the way he asked, not curious, not hungry but braced. Like a man asking the question whose answer he already half knew and dreaded, that pulled the truth up out of me. I told him about my father's debt and the kindness Sterling showed in taking in the orphan, and how the town had praised that kindness, and how the kindness had a cellar door. I told him about the polished cane and the marks under my collar and the one time I had spoken and what it had cost me. I told him there was no help in Tamarack because the marshal owed the doctor his house, and the judge his daughter's life, and every soul in the valley owed him a bell or a fever broken or a leg set straight. And a man like that is not a man. He is a wall, and you cannot run to anyone who lives in his shadow. And then, because I had begun and could not stop, I told him the part I had not let myself think about since the larder door. I told him why I truly ran. It wasn't the beatings, I said, and my voice was steady now, steadier than it had been all night, because the worst thing is steadying once you finally say it. I'd lived 2 years with the beatings. I'd have lived 2 more. I ran because of what I saw. He turned from the fire and looked at me full, and waited. 3 nights ago there was a girl brought to the surgery. A hired girl from the Vance farm in trouble, the kind of trouble a girl goes quietly to a doctor for. I was on the back stair. I wasn't meant to see. I had to stop. The dog pressed warm against my leg. I saw him lose his temper with her. I saw what his hands could do when there was no collar to hide it under. And when it was done, he stood there a long while just breathing, arranging his face, and then he went out to the parlor and told the man who'd brought her that the poor child had hemorrhaged, that he'd done all he could, that the ground out past the orchard was soft this time of year. The tears came again, but I did not stop for them. Soft ground. That's what he told the town about my sister, too, a year ago. Annie came here to work in a good house and she stopped writing, and the doctor said she'd taken sick and slipped away in the night, and the ground past the orchard was soft. I never believed it, but I never knew. Until 3 nights ago, when I watched him say the very same words over a girl whose blood was still on his sleeve. The cabin was so quiet I could hear the snow. When I looked up, Silas Bowen had gone the gray-white of a man who has been struck without warning. His big hands had closed on the arms of the chair until the wood creaked. The scar stood out livid against his bloodless face. And Boone, the half-wild dog who trusted no one, had risen and gone to his master and pushed his head hard into the man's side, whining, as if the dog felt the thing breaking loose in him before either of us could put a word to it. What, Silas said, very low, was your sister's name? Annie, I said. Annie Whitfield, though she went by my mother's name here, Annie Bowen. He made a sound I have never heard a man make before or since. Not a sob, something tearing. Annie Bowen, he said, was my sister. I have learned since that the world is not so wide as it pretends. That 2 people fleeing the same monster from opposite ends of it can wash up under the same cedar tree on the same mountain on the same killing night. And that this is not a miracle but only what grief does. It pulls the threads of a thing toward each other until they knot. He told me his half of it then, plain and slow, the way I have said he told everything. How he had not always been a ghost on a ridge. How for 15 years he had been a lawman down in the valleys and the boomtowns. A big quiet man good at finding people who did not want to be found. And how he had grown sick to the soul of watching rich men buy verdicts and poor men hang for hunger. Until one day, he simply hung the badge on a nail and walked up into the high country to be done with the whole rotten business of men. He had a younger sister, the only family left to him, and he had set her up in a respectable position in a clean little town called Tamarack, with a respectable, respected family, the household of a fine physician everyone spoke well of. He had thought her safe. He had thought, in the one act of trust he had left in him, that he had put the one person he loved somewhere the rot could not reach. And then her letters had stopped. And when he came down off the mountain to ask after her, the good doctor had met him on the porch with sorrowful eyes and soft words about a fever and soft ground past the orchard. And Silas, who had spent 15 years learning to read the small lies men tell, had stood there knowing in his gut, that he was being lied to over his own sister's grave, and had not been able to prove a single thing, because there was no body anyone would let him dig for, because the marshal owed the doctor his house, because in Tamarack the doctor was not a man, he was a wall. I went back up the mountain, he said, and his voice was ash, because there was nothing I could do that wouldn't end with me hanged and him weeping prettily at my trial. A man like that, you can't fight him with a rifle. He's too well loved. I've lain awake a year, woman, knowing what I knew and able to prove not one word of it. He looked at me, and at the small water-stained book I had not let go of even while I held the iron, the book I had carried against my ribs through the creek and the cold and the dying. What's that you've held onto like it's your own heart?" I unwrapped the oilcloth with shaking hands and held it out to him. "Her diary," I said. "It's all of her I could find in that house. I took it because I couldn't bear to leave the last of her under his roof. I never read it close. I couldn't." He took it like a man taking something hot. He turned it to the firelight and opened it, and I watched his face as he read his sister's hand, and I watched the grief in it harden into something with edges. He read for a long time. The fire burned down and he did not feed it. "She knew," he said at last, very quiet. "Toward the end. She was afraid of him. She wrote it down, what he did to the hired girls, what he hid, the soft ground, the names. She names them, Clara. 3 girls before you ever came to that house. She kept account of it the way a frightened person keeps account, hoping someone someday would believe the paper if they wouldn't believe the mouth." He closed the book and pressed it flat between his 2 hands like a man at prayer. "This is the rope. Your eyes saw it done, and her hand wrote it down before it was done to her. A witness and a record. There's not a wall in this country built high enough to keep that out of a court if we can get it to one that he doesn't own." I had been running for my life, and I had thought of nothing past the next tree, the next breath, the next foot of snow. For the first time, looking at that small, ruined book in those huge, gentle hands, I let myself think of something past surviving. I let myself think of him answering for it. And that was the moment, of course, that the mountain told us we were not alone. It was not the wind. It was the sharp, clean crack of a dry branch breaking under a careful boot, and then Boone was on his feet, no growl this time, every hair standing, his lips peeled back silent, which is the worst thing a dog can do, the silent kind, the kind that means it is past warning and into reckoning. Silas moved faster than a man that size has any right to. He pinched out the lamp, and the cabin dropped into the gray of the stormlight, and he had the long Henry rifle off its pegs and a fistful of cartridges out of a tin before I had finished drawing breath. He pushed me down behind the heavy iron cook stove, the one solid thing in the room a bullet would not pass through, and pressed the diary into my hands and folded my fingers over it. "That book is why he spent men and dogs on a night like this to fetch back one girl," he breathed against my ear. "Not pride, not even cruelty. He knows what you carry even if you didn't. So you keep low and you keep that dry, and whatever happens to me, that book gets off this mountain. Do you hear? Silas, do you hear me, Clara?" "I hear you." Boone had taken up a place beside me without being told, a low, brindle shadow trembling with the want to fight. Through the slats of the shutter I could see them now, 3 shapes coming up out of the white at the tree line, breaking the long, pure dark of the storm. I knew 2 of them. The big one was a logger called Hask that the doctor used for the kind of work a doctor's hands shouldn't do. And in the middle, on a heaving horse, bundled in a buffalo coat with a lantern held high and the brass of his office catching the light, was Marshal Prude himself, the man who owed Dr. Sterling his house. Come up the mountain in a blizzard to do the wall's bidding, and call it the law. "Bowen," the marshal shouted, and his voice was almost kindly, almost reasonable, the way the doctor's was because they all caught it from him in the end. "Silas Bowen, we know you're up here. The doctor's ward has wandered off in her sickness, poor thing, and we've come to bring her home safe. No quarrel with you. Send the girl out and we'll all of us get down off this mountain before it kills us." Silas put his mouth to the gap in the shutter. "There's no sick girl up here, Prude," he called, even and unhurried. "There's a witness, and there's the doctor's own dead sister's account of him in her own hand. You ride down off my mountain and you tell Ezra Sterling that the rope he's been afraid of for a year is up here in the snow with 2 people who watched him kill, and there is not enough money in his black bag to bury it this time." The silence that followed had a different weight than the silence before. I think, in it, Marshal Prude understood for the first time exactly what he had ridden up to do, and exactly how he would be remembered for it. And I think he chose, as weak men choose, to do it anyway and hope the snow would keep his secret. "Take it," he said to Hask low. Take it and burn the rest. The first volley tore the night apart. Bullets walked across the log wall and burst the shutter to splinters and shattered the one pane of glass into the room, and I screamed and pressed myself flat behind the iron stove with the diary crushed to my chest and Boone's body half over mine. The noise was beyond anything, a hammering that I felt in my teeth and my bones. Silas did not flinch. He crouched at the window edge in the dark and he waited, patient as he'd waited by my bed. And when there came a lull while they reloaded, he rose and fired twice, and outside a man howled, and Hask's voice cursed, and the horse screamed and bolted riderless into the trees. "They'll rush the door," Silas said, calm, feeding shells. "Stay down." They rushed the door. It came off its bolt under a shoulder with a crack like the breaking branch, and the storm howled in white, and the big man Hask was through it with a pistol already up and firing, and the muzzle flash lit the room, and Silas grunted and staggered and went down to one knee, the Henry slipping from his grip, a dark wet bloom spreading high on his left shoulder where the bear hide had torn open. Hask stepped into the cabin grinning, swinging the pistol toward the dark behind the stove, toward me. And here is the thing I have thought about every day since. 2 years before, I had learned to make myself small, to make no sound, to let it happen, because making it stop only ever made it worse. That girl was still in me, crouched and silent, certain that silence was the only thing that had ever kept her alive. But Boone went first. The dog launched off my body with a sound I'd never heard from him, all that silence breaking at once, and took the big man's gun arm in his teeth, and the pistol went wide and barked into the ceiling, and Hask roared and clubbed the dog off him with the iron of the gun, and Boone hit the wall and lay still, and something in me that had been pressed down for 2 years stood up. I did not make myself small. I came up out of the dark behind the stove with the fire iron I had threatened a kind man with the night before. Silas had left it leaning where I could reach it, I think on purpose. I never asked, and I swung it with everything 2 years of held-down rage could put behind it, and the heavy iron took Hask across the back of the skull with a sound I will not describe, and he dropped where he stood and did not move again. Silas, on one knee, had his rifle back in his hands. The third man came through the broken door, and Silas fired from the floor, and the man went backward into the snow and was gone. Then there was only the wind, and the white pouring in through the open door, and Silas bleeding against the stones, and me standing over a fallen man with an iron bar shaking in my 2 hands, and a dog, my dog now, the dog who had told the truth about me, lying too still against the wall. Boone lived. I want to say that first, because I have learned that an audience will forgive a great deal of grief if you let them keep the dog. He had a broken foreleg and a knot on his skull the size of a fist, and he limped for the rest of his days and walked a little sideways like a crab when he was tired. But he lived, and he never again pretended to mistrust me, which I think had only ever been pretending, since the first night he'd lain with his chin on my frozen ankles and refused to be moved. Silas lived too, though it was a near thing and a long road. I did for his shoulder what I had watched a wicked man do well 100 times. I cleaned it and packed it and bound it, and I found I had learned in 2 bad years one good thing. He lost some use of the arm. He says he doesn't miss it. He could always lift more with one than most men with 2. When the storm broke, we did not go down to Tamarack. We went the other way, north and east, 3 hard days over the pass with the diary wrapped in oilcloth against my ribs again, where it had ridden the whole long way, to a town the doctor's shadow did not reach. There was a circuit judge there, an old hard man named Caro who owed Ezra Sterling nothing and disliked, on principle, men who were loved too easily. And there was a newspaper man, which I have come to believe is sometimes a mightier thing than a judge. I will not pretend it was simple. A beloved man does not fall in a day. The doctor's lawyers called me a hysteric, a thief, a fallen girl inventing wickedness about her benefactor out of spite, and for a while the room believed them because that is what rooms have always wanted to believe, that the kind face is the true one. The hardest thing I ever did was harder than the blizzard. It was standing in a lit room full of doubting men and saying, out loud, in my own steady voice, the things I had been taught my whole life that no one would believe, and not stopping when their faces told me to stop. But this time I was not alone with my mouth. This time there was Annie's hand on the page, 3 girls named before me, the fear written down in the small, careful account of someone hopping the paper would be braver than the world. This time there was a scarred giant of a man who had been a lawman for 15 years and knew how to make a record stand. And this time, when I had said my piece and sat down trembling, a frightened farmer named Vance stood up at the back of the room. The man whose hired girl had bled out under the doctor's hands 3 nights before I ran, and said that he had wondered, that he had always wondered, and that he was done being afraid of a wall. After him they came, one and then another and then more than the room could hold. It turns out a wall, once one stone is pulled, is only a great pile of loose stones after all. 3 weeks after the snow, the paper carried it across the whole territory. The beloved physician of Tamarack arrested. A year of soft ground past the orchard dug up at last. 4 graves found where there should have been none. Marshal Prout indicted alongside him for the men he'd led up a mountain in a blizzard to murder a witness. The town that had loved Ezra Sterling so well it could not see him discovered, all at once and all together, that it had never known him at all, that the gentlest hands in the Cascades had only ever been gentle in the light. I did not go back to watch them hang. Silas asked if I wanted to. I told him I had spent enough of my life on what that man did. I would rather spend the rest on what he didn't manage to take. We built a new place the next summer far up in a country he knew, on a clear high lake ringed with pine where the only law is the kind the mountain keeps. It is small and tight and warm, and the door bolts from the inside and from nowhere else, and I built half of it with my own 2 hands, which still surprises me when I look at them. They are stronger than they were. So am I. There is a porch that faces the water, and in the long evenings I sit on it wrapped in a wool shawl, and I watch a great bearded man split firewood with slow, even strokes, and a brindled dog who walks a little sideways lie in the last of the sun, and pretend to be asleep while he watches the both of us. The way he has watched me since the night he found me and decided, on no evidence I have ever been able to find, that I was worth digging out of the snow. I touch my jaw sometimes, where the doctor's marks used to be, and there is nothing there now but skin and the wind. I went into the freezing forest that night certain I was going to die, and glad of it, because dying free seemed the most a girl like me could hope to win. I was wrong about the most I could win. I was wrong about a great many things, about who is safe and who is dangerous, about which faces tell the truth, about whether the paper is braver than the world or only waiting for one mouth to be brave first. I had been taught my whole life that the kind, respected, beloved man was the safe one, and the wild scarred giant on the mountain was the thing to fear. I had it exactly backward, the way the world so often has it exactly backward. The man everyone trusted was a grave with a good bedside manner. And the man they would have crossed the road to avoid carried a wounded girl up a mountain in a killing storm because the only law he had left would not let him do otherwise. And then he kept her, and healed her, and stood in a lit room and helped her be believed. A reputation is not a character. I would carve it over the door if Silas would let me. The truth does not always win, but it is patient, and it keeps, the way my sister's small water-stained book kept against my ribs through the creek and the cold and the dark. It outlived the man who tried to bury it. I fled into the freezing woods expecting to die. Instead, in the heart of the thing the whole world had taught me to be afraid of, I found I was finally, completely, for the first time in my life, home.